I do believe that that people are more lonesome than they were. They're more socially isolated. Yeah, I'm loath to make intergenerational comparisons, because
Sure.
every generation thinks that this current young generation is worse than any generation that's ever existed.
What is better and what is worse than ever right now in our culture?
We have no idea what this intense focus on social media is doing to everyone, but particularly to young people. I mean, can you imagine that nothing you ever did as a teenager could be forgotten? Awful.
I live in a world where people have said horrible things about me on the internet and on social media.
Yeah, that's fun, eh?
Yeah, it's so fun. I know you have a lot of experience with that, but I don't know them. So I can write that off to they don't even know me, right? But now this happens in school and a kid can read this and they're in class with that person or they have a locker near them. And I think that is such a dangerous and horrible thing for a kid to have to deal with. I very much empathize with kids today and social media.
So there's a female pattern of antisocial behavior and there's a male pattern of antisocial behavior. And the male pattern of antisocial behavior is a lot more physically violent. The female pattern of antisocial behavior is reputation destruction.
Ooh.
And it scales on the internet. Physical aggression doesn't, right? Because what can you do?
Right.
It's limited.
Right.
And I'm not saying it's not serious. It can obviously be mortally serious, right? It's serious. Yes. But it does characterize a small minority of men, especially consistently.
Wow.
But female antisocial behavior, which is almost never discussed, there's a large research literature on it. Because people have wondered, that if you look at boys and girls, for example, 2-year-olds, I mentioned them, some 2-year-olds are aggressive. And that's by nature, mostly. Okay, so they kick, hit, bite, and steal in groups of 2-year-olds. Now, they're not very harmful because they're 2. But if it isn't socialized, it turns into conduct disorder, and that turns into antisocial and criminal behavior. That's what happens. So most people who are criminal by the time they're 18 were aggressive when they were 2 and weren't socialized. Okay, so now most of those aggressive 2-year-olds are boys. If you define aggression by hitting, kicking, stealing, and biting.
Sure.
But the reputation destruction, that starts early with girls, and that's their form of antisocial behavior. And, we don't know what political manifestation female antisocial behavior will produce because the complete immersement of men and women in the political realm is new. But to think that it'll be nothing, well, you have to be a complete bloody fool to think that, because obviously the dark side of men has a dark political edge. Why wouldn't the dark side of women have a dark political edge? But I can't help seeing it. I see it. I think that's the reputation destruction that's characteristic of social media, seems to be. I mean, I saw it when girls went after my daughter, in particular when she was a teenager, bullying on social media. They use reputation destruction, and it can be unbelievably vicious. Well, you said you've been attacked plenty online. It's also possible that, there's a large proportion of men who use reputation destruction too online. So I wouldn't say that this is something limited to women by any stretch of the imagination, but I do know that those two patterns of antisocial behavior exist. So, and that one doesn't scale. So that is a relevant issue. You were asked about body image or commented on body image. A lot of people think that that's a consequence of social pressure, body image trouble. And I don't think there's any evidence for that, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, well, women are more likely to have body image problems than men.
Right.
Okay, so that's the first thing. So, and that's likely because body morphology is more important in mating choice for women than it is for men. Men tend to prefer women who show signs of fertility. That's associated with youth and symmetry. So symmetry is very, very important as a marker of beauty. So we tend to see symmetrical faces as beautiful. Waist to hip ratio, 0.68. That seems to be relatively standard culturally, regardless of body size. And that's associated with cardiovascular health and with fertility. And so there's an ideal female morphology. And any deviation from that causes upset. And women are more prone to negative emotion than men. Not anger, by the way. That's a tougher one.
Mm-hmm.
But anxiety and pain-related emotions, women are more sensitive to those than men. Maybe because they're smaller and life is more dangerous to them and they have to be more threat sensitive. Maybe because they take care of infants. And so, one question, I've never discussed this, I don't think, online. Women become more sensitive to negative emotion than men when they hit puberty, not before. And it never goes away after that. Right? So it's a permanent transformation.
Even now, after menopause, just like...
Yeah, well, the men and women get more stable emotionally as they get older, but the difference between men and women doesn't seem to attenuate. And so women become sexually vulnerable at puberty. So that might be one reason why they would be more sensitive to danger, right?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's plenty of places in the world where you wouldn't walk alone.
Sure.
Right. There's plenty of places where walking alone would make you a valid target even.
Right.
Right. And I would say that's probably more the norm for human societies than the exception. We assume that our relatively safe environments are normal. They're not. They took a lot of work to get safe, like so much work that it's almost incomprehensible. There's just so many things we take for granted that make up that safety, that are invisible because it's mostly there. But I also wonder possibly if women's nervous systems are optimized for the woman-child dyad and not for the woman. So imagine that, if you have a baby, you're definitely more vulnerable.
Right.
Right. And so perhaps your nervous system should reflect that because you're the one making the decisions. And, because women are more prone to anxiety disorders and depression than men. That seems true cross-culturally. And it goes along with that sensitivity to negative emotion. You think, what's the advantage to that? Because it causes a lot of suffering. It's also a good predictor of marital instability because higher levels of negative emotion predict, unhappiness. It's certainly possible that women's nervous systems, adult women's, are optimized for the infant mother dyad. I mean, why would we expect it to be other than that? Because a baby is so unbelievably dependent. You have to be more cautious once you have an infant, especially one under 1 year old.
What are the positives of anxiety?
Well, you're more likely to stay away from danger.